I had planned these sermon topics before Jesus Christ Superstar. And it just turns out that we'll be starting our first performances next weekend. So these are all very timely for you, not only to hear pearls of wisdom, but to get you so excited that you want to all be sure to bring your friends Friday and Saturday at 7 o'clock to the St. Johnsbury School Auditorium to watch, well, actually I don't do much of anything, but to watch Nicole be married. Now what's really interesting, I don't know how she did it, but when we got to Monday practice, Nicole had a DVD copy of the sermon about Mary Magdalene not being a woman of ill repute to pass out to everybody in the theater. Because she got tired of the whore jokes. Because that's what we learned about. Today we're going to talk about Judas. And the thing that I really appreciate about the whole topic of Judas is that it's not so much about the man, the individual, the person, as it is about what it says concerning the relationship of God with humanity. Now, if as millions, it might even be the majority opinion of Christians, that God has a plan for everything. Everything that happens in the world, God has preordained. If, in fact, that is the case, then we cannot look down and blame Judas for anything. Because it's not his fault. All he's doing is what God was making him to do in the first place. Now, the problem with that, as I have mentioned before, and I'm sure I will mention again in my tenure here, is that as soon as you begin to live into that fact, then all kinds of other things logically have to follow. And I am nothing if not a stickler for logical progressions in people's thought. You can believe anything you want, but you must be willing to live with the consequences of logically following that out. Now, the passage in Acts that David shared with us, it talked about Judas doing that to fulfill the scriptures of David. And throughout the New Testament Gospels, it refers to these things need to come to pass to fulfill what was written, to fulfill the words of the prophets, to fulfill the will of God. Fine, I have zero problem with that. But you gotta be willing to live with what that says. And if you're going to follow that, which again, God love you and bless you, Judas is off the hook. Somebody had to turn Jesus in so that the Son of Man could suffer for 3 days to be killed and crucified and then rise on the third day. Somebody had to do it. If not Judas, then maybe Fred or Sue, but Judas was the one that got picked. So in fact, we should not look at Judas as someone that did something unbelievably terrible and awful, but as somebody that was willing to do something that he knew wasn't right, he knew was going to just make his life a living hell for the rest of it in order to follow the will and the path of God. Now, can anyone disagree with the logic of those statements? And the answer is no, you can't. Because the logic is completely flawless. It is. But people don't like that, because then the problem is, Judas, that's fine. Judas was fulfilled. God has a plan. Judas fulfilled the plan. That's great. Even though it was one of the most unbelievably horrific events in human history that's been recorded. The torture and crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Well, now we have to follow that same logical progression throughout history. And all of a sudden, name me the worst, terrible, horrific thing that you can think of. Off the top of your head, anybody? The Holocaust. Part of God's plan, because God plans everything, we've already determined that. So, in fact, we can't hold Hitler as the Antichrist and the absolute embodiment of all evil, because somebody had to do it, because God had it planned from the very beginning. So in fact, we should actually kind of feel sorry for poor Adolf, because somebody had to do the messy work, and it just fell to him. Now what's really interesting is right now, well, not right now, but next Sunday morning at about 4:30, thousands of TVs will be turned off or the channel change right now. The people that watch us, our broadcast. Well, maybe 1,000 was over. 7 or so people are going to turn. 9/11. Part of God's plan. God had it all preordained from the beginning. So those so-called terrorists that flew those planes in and killed those 3,000 Americans, actually, they were kind of conduits of God's will, and were doing it because somebody had to fulfill that part of God's plan that's out there. Now, does anybody agree with the last two examples, considering the Holocaust and 9/11? And my guess is none of you do. And as a matter of fact, I know none of you do, because I have the distinct advantage of watching all the faces going. No, of course not. Of course not. So when we look at Judas, and we look at his betrayal of Jesus, of the one whom he had followed, ministered with, and my guess is too, for the 3 years that they were together, he made a conscious decision. Now, personally, I don't think it was a conscious decision that he made for him personally. I think he really believed that, and I don't want to get too superstar-y, but they did plan that musical on the Gospels, although loosely they did. Judas looked at the way things were going and was getting a little worried. Well, now all of a sudden we're going to go to Jerusalem during Passover, and we know that the Romans are they got like hair triggers. Because they're going to, anything that happens, they're going to stomp down, because we got hundreds of thousands of Jews crammed into this little 25 square mile space. So we don't want anybody getting out of hand. I think he had hoped, I think in his mind, that they would spirit Jesus away someplace safe. Things would blow over and we'd go from there. I really think that's what he had in mind. But he was naive. And as soon as he allowed the temple authorities to have an opportunity to get Jesus out of the picture, they took advantage of it. When I read the story of Judas and what he did, I see a lot of me in the story. And if we're willing to be honest, my guess is you would see a lot of you there also. You know, things start to get tough in our own personal lives. We get to a point where we need to make a decision, and we kind of rationalize things so that, well, this would be really the best way to do it because it wouldn't hurt as many people, so I think we'll just, go this way. And before you know it, we're walking in a direction that takes us away from God rather than to and communion. For me, Judas represents all of us. Just as Peter did when he denied Jesus. What's the difference between the two? One is Judas was completely vilified. And there's two stories. One, he killed himself. The second is he bought a parcel of land with his 30 pieces of silver. And while plowing it, he slipped in some cow manure, fell on the plow, and his gut spilled out on the ground. That's in the book of Acts. You can look that one up. I was going to read that one, but I thought, we'll let that one for your imagination. Whereas Peter, he did it, denied Jesus, said, mea culpa, mea maximus culpa. And he becomes Pope. I don't get it. They both turned their back on Jesus. But Judas is the heavy. I think that Judas needs to be lifted up, remembered, needs to be properly understood. And I think if we do that, if we are willing to do that as individuals, as a congregation, we will understand that we have probably followed the path of Judas at least, if not more times, less times, than we have the path of Christ. We've taken the path of least resistance. We've gone down the road that's easier for us rather than face the tough decisions and the tough situations that stand before us each and every day of our lives. Yeah, Judas did a terrible, awful, unbelievable thing. But I guess my question for me and my question for you is, have we and do we do any less anytime we turn our back on the teachings of Christ and follow our own way? Obviously, a lot of this is speculation on my part. I'd like to think speculation that has been developed over the years and after a good bit of study and reading and prayer. But it's speculation nonetheless. What I do know with complete and utter confidence is that no matter how terrible and heinous his acts may have been, Judas was forgiven. Judas was allowed his place in paradise. And for me personally, I have to believe that. Because I know what I have done during the course of my life. And if there is not forgiveness and sanctification for Judas, then I am without hope. But I do have hope. Because of this season of Easter, because of the resurrection that we remember and that we celebrate, and because of the loving and compassionate God that has brought it to us. So, the next time you're reading in the Scriptures, or sitting in Sunday school, or sitting at Jesus Christ Superstar next Friday and Saturday at 7 o'clock at the St. Johnsbury Academy, the following weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday matinee at 2. And you hear the story of Judas. Give him a break. Because really, we're the same. Amen.